ICQ Podcast episode 250. Building a Flossie, Yaesu and RSGB Online Exams. Well, hello fellow Amateur Ham Radio enthusiasts and welcome to this our 250th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported by Robert Menz, Papa Delta Zero, Romeo Mike X-Ray, Grant Porter, Kilo Golf 4 Sierra Delta Romeo, Nick Major, Golf Zero Hotel Foxtrot Lima, and also 2 anonymous donors along with our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, I'm joined by Leslie, Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike Zero Mike November Golf, Bill, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, and Matthew, Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray to discuss the latest Amateur Ham Radio news. And this episode's feature is a triple bill from UK Hamfest, which covers interviews with the RSGB Online Training Assessment, the building of a Flossie mobile station, and an update from Yaesu. Well, as always, it's our supporters that keep this show advert-free, and we'd like to thank Grant Porter, Kilo Golf 4 Sierra Delta Romeo, and says, as always, keep putting out a great show. Always happy to find them in his podcast feed, so thanks a lot for your support there, Grant. Robert Menz from the Netherlands, PD0 Romeo Mike X-Ray, says he's been a listener for about a year and got his novice license about 6 months ago. Would like to thank the entire team for an interesting show, and of course big congratulations on our upcoming 250th episode, so thanks a lot for that support. And Nick, Golf Zero Hotel Foxtrot Lima, says it's an absolute pleasure to support the show. What a wonderful entertaining show, and he's apologising because he's only just found us. That's fine, Nick, it's great you're on board. First licensed in 85, but took a break for 20 years from the hobby and returned 3 years ago, and he's enjoying the hobby more than ever. He operates from Leicestershire in the UK, and his favourite modes is CW, Chasing DX, and a general rag chew on HF. And he says basically the show is great and makes a trip to work more entertaining. So we'd certainly thank them for those feedback comments there, Nick, and 2 anonymous donors as well. Those guys responded very kindly to our call to help us out with some donations for new microphones equipment. We're about half of the way there for the money we need, so if you'd like to consider us, please visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send away would be greatly appreciated and help buy some new microphones for the show. Well, now we join Leslie, Edmund, Bill and Matthew as they discuss the latest amateur radio news, including why is traditional ham radio no longer attractive, and the amateur radio response to the US hurricane season. Hope you enjoy. Well, everyone, welcome to the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast Roundtable for this episode 250. And I'm joined this week by the man that's probably the most popular member of the team, as stated by his absence from Hamfest this couple of weeks ago, Mr. Leslie Butterfield, Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo. Sir, I hope you're well and you're recovering well.
Yeah, I'm recovering. I'm actually in rehab. Any jokes are welcome on that. But yes, I am recovering. Big squirt of the WD-40 in the knee, but I'm absolutely fine.
Fantastic. So you hear any dodgy creaking in the background? It's that noise gate couldn't wipe out his knees trying to get up off the table there. Also joined by Matthew, Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray. Matt, great to have you on the show. First time working on the show, and hopefully we're going to have a great episode.
Yeah, it's great to always be a part of this and to make the time to be here. So fantastic for the invitation, and congratulations to the ICQ podcast for episode 250. Right? Fantastic,
very much. And from the States, we have Bill Barnes, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray. Bill, great to chat to you again.
Yes, thank you, and welcome again, and congratulations on 250. When most podcasts make it 6 to 30, you guys made it 250 in almost 10 years. Great job, everybody.
Yeah, and this is no other lie. We thought we'd only ever do 10. We didn't think anyone would ever listen. So just shows you what we knew. And our final member of the panel tonight, Edmund Spicer, Mike 0, Mike November Golf. Edmund, great to catch up again. Hamfest was a really enjoyable weekend, wasn't it?
It was indeed, and it was my first visit there, and I thoroughly recommend the future editions of Hamfest to anybody who hasn't been before, and congratulations to everybody involved in the ICQ podcast on reaching the 250th episode.
Thanks, guys. So Martin is on holiday in this episode. You'll be hearing him later on in the feature section. He's enjoying a well-earned break in Cyprus. Obviously, I say thanks as well, not only to the guys here, but also to Chris Howard, Martin Rothwell, Ed Durant, and Dan Romanchik as well for all their help as well in helping us get to episode 250. So I say, guys, certainly, I say it's been a great, enjoyable time, and we shall continue on, because I think, I say, if we all keep laughing the way we do, we'll certainly never get bored doing the show. Well, let's deal with this topic straight up first off, and this is a news story here. The ARU President Tim Ellam talking about how traditional ham radio is no longer attractive, and I say he seems to be on a bit of a soapbox here, should we say, to try and make amateur radio more attractive to the youth. This seems to be coming around quite regularly at the moment, guys, and I'm wondering if you guys are seeing what I'm seeing when I'm out and about on the ham radio circuit. So we'll start with Bill in the States and just really see what the flavour is from the US side of things in terms of getting younger people interested in the hobby.
Yeah, I was reading this article, and this does mirror other articles I've read by, folks here in the States. And I think I read a South African article, same thing, talking about similar things. Most recently, I mean, from me asking around and talking to folks and that kind of stuff, it seems like, yeah, that's kind of true. We're bringing in a lot of kids that, well, I say kids, but they're not necessarily that young. We're bringing in a lot of newer hams. It seems to be we're getting them from the kit building and the home brewing and the I built this thing and I want to do a communications project between two Adrenos and Raspberry Pis and Beagle boards, and I can't go far enough. I need a little more power, so I get my ham license so I can use more power. I'm hearing that, but I've yet to actually sit down and talk to one of these folks, because I'm really fascinated and I want to sit down and actually chat with somebody for 15, 20 minutes to find out exactly what they're building, because I think that's really neat anyway.
Certainly so. I mean, Edmund, let's be honest about it now, kids don't even need to think about tuning in an FM radio anymore to listen to music like that. It's all smartphone driven and, apps and all that sort of things. But I mean, surely there is still a place for amateur radio for the youth of today.
There is, and I suppose it depends what we mean by the youth and young people, because my 6-year-old step-grandson, whenever he comes to visit us here, if he goes into the kitchen where my HF station is located, one of the first things he'll ask with great enthusiasm is for me to start transmitting some whisper to see how far the signal will go. And he gets really excited and enthused about that at special event stations, at Jamboree on the air, Thinking Day on the air stations, Morse code sounders, sending your name in CW. That's always popular with quote-unquote young people. If you get some license-free low-power PMR 446 radios, that's popular as well. Slow-scan TV from one side of the room to the other, that spikes interest as well. But then if you turn the clock forward a bit to reach the mean, moody, magnificent teenage years, then the attitude seems to be, well, internet, Skype, smartphones, I can do all that anyway, so what? Which is very different to when I first became interested. I remember in the early 90s when I first became aware of amateur radio, I listened to some stations in Europe, probably on 40 metres, and even though they weren't particularly far away, even though they weren't DX, the fact that they were in a foreign country, that just stopped me in my tracks. It seemed so magical and so amazing because it was something I'd never experienced before. Okay, international phone calls existed, but they were horrendously expensive compared to today. So to all intents and purposes, I never made international phone calls. And the internet, as we know it today, just simply wasn't around in that form. So that was something really, well, yeah, magical, that is the word. Whereas today, if you say to young people, well, you can talk to people in other countries around the other side of the world, they can quite rightly turn around and say, well, so what? I can do that on my smartphone. But I don't really know what the answer is. Perhaps it's just a consequence of the inevitable march of technology.
I've been trying to work out when I was going to jump on my soapbox on this one, because I don't necessarily think posts from that the Tim Adam here talks about, whether I don't necessarily see some of that stuff when I'm at Hamfest and when I'm doing this stuff here at the podcast and what we do online and all those sort of things as well. Yes, I get the fact that there are more things that are really of interest to young people today than amateur radio. However, correct me if I'm wrong here, there's always been more things of interest to young people than amateur radio. The work that kit builders are doing, there's the stuff we're doing with Jota and Scouts on the Air and all those sort of things. The input that people like Lauren M6HLR winning the Wainwright's Award, being at Hamfest, and she was presented with an award after the RSGB's Club of the Year Awards. And even the club that won the Club of the Year award, they turned around to each other and said, you know what, that's the picture that should go on Radcom at next episode. That's the future of our hobby. That is the type of people we need to be attracting into our hobby. So there are people coming in and they're harnessing technology like the RF Finder device, the smartphone with the 70-72 meter band radio built into it, and similar to what the Austrian group are doing, the OVSV group are doing, etc. There are a lot of ways for young people to get into the hobby. There are a lot of ways to get into on interesting things. And I think digital and building and being advised is still just as strong. The difference being is probably, whereas before past is that now maybe there are other electronical projects out there that might distract somebody. So where you someone who predominantly would have been electronically focused would have gone ham radio maybe say 40 years ago, now they can go in 1,001 other directions. However, as we see, is that while we might not get them as teenagers, we do get them back in the 30s, the 40s and 50s. So I don't relate to these type of articles as though for our hobby is dying a bit. I think loads of people doing loads of great work to attract people into the hobby across all different age groups. And it is evident that the numbers of amateurs are growing. There are declines in parts of the hobby in terms of membership to certain groups, etc. But in general, the hobby is on a slight increase, a slight growth. And to me, I don't relate to these type of articles. Maybe I'm wrong. So Leslie, do you relate to that as well? The fact that we are bringing people into the hobby just in different ways than we once were, or do you think there is a general decline of bringing people in?
Well, I think you've raised some very important points. The youngsters, that they do something early on in life and then they get other interests. And then, yes, you're right, pick it up and later on in life. And I'm absolutely fine with that. The one thing I did pick up on here, and he's sort of gone 3/4 way down the page, and the phrase he comes out with is, I fear. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. There's nothing to fear. We've got different technology. We've got all sorts of bits and pieces. It's not going to decimate the hobby. Quite the reverse. It's going to strengthen it. People thought when PCs that the hobby's going to fall apart and the sky is going to fall on our heads. No, this stuff has actually enhanced the hobby, and it's making it stronger, and it's tools that we can use. This stuff we're using now wasn't around when I was 17, but it's great stuff now. Yeah. And that's the way I look at it. I think we should be positive about this and not negative.
Yeah. I suppose, mate, it's that evolution again on the hobby. I mean, I'm sure there's people that still would hanker for Valve radio still and things on those lines, but at the same time, there's a lot of benefit in that movement.
Times change.
Yeah. There's a lot of movement, Matt, isn't there, on times changing and different now kit being out there on the market and maybe making it easier for people to get on stream.
Well, that's the thing. Times change, right? And the title of this article was "Traditional Ham Radio is no longer attractive," and the key word here is traditional, because as everyone has just spoken about, the hobby has changed. The world has changed, right? Internet's come on. All of a sudden, your book is now an electronic device in your hand, and you think about internet as being this new, commercial tool, as well as art and music and social media, social interaction. the world is definitely very, very different, and it won't go backwards. Yeah. And so, sure, there's the standard issues of competitive hobbies and different interests. And as you grow older, you might think of girls or boys rather than toys. And then, you get into a later part of your life and you have other responsibilities and things take over. Hobbies wax and wane. But I think, as has been said, the hook that you see at some point in your life, if you're young and you were fascinated by that magic of pushing a button and playing in the backyard with a walkie-talkie, and you get that vibe, that hook, you'll never forget it. It's your first exposure. So I think that getting those moments with kids when they're young, when they're introduced to new ideas and new experiences, that's an important piece. You can never then subsequently plan that they're going to fall into the hobby like their father, like their grandfather, and the world is not as narrow as it used to be, perhaps.
Yeah.
But Bill mentioned earlier that the whole sort of subculture of Arduinos and all that kind of maker ethic that's now quite popular in the past 15 or 20 years. That's going to occupy people's time. But the only real way to communicate wirelessly, no matter what you're doing it for or how you're doing it, is through radio. And that access to spectrum use will be predominantly enabled only through a license, whatever country you're in, right? The Internet of Things is going to create less frequency spectrum, and so anyone who as an individual wants to use radio space is going to have a license. So I don't think the amateur radio hobby is going to change. It's not going to go away. If anything, we're going to have less spectrum, and we have to defend that. But the independent access to that part of a universal resource, if you want to call it, it will always be there. The hooks to get kids into the hobby, well, it may not be such a direct thing as giving them a microphone and letting them talk to Japan or something. It may be a technical thing. They'll probably fall in love with computers first, and then they'll discover, some other elements, and then they'll want to talk, maybe internationally, and then they'll go to the internet. But at some point, an interested kid, there's, even if you say 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 kids will be that science or technology or engineering orientated mind, and will pick this up and pursue it. So I can see that it's going to change. The way that we bring in the next generation is going to change compared to the last 25 years, the last 50 years. And that ship truly has sailed, I think. To try to replicate that in the future, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. But they will find different roads into the hobby in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah,
and it's up to us as a hobby to recognise that change and to raise our game, not complain about it.
Yeah, no, so I think it's time to move on to our next news story now. And going on from talking about the potential future of things, we've got this issue again raising its ugly head about RF pollution from LED bulbs. Leslie, this is something that keeps coming up.
I used to work for Thorn EMI many moons ago, and my first boss would have slapped me if I'd called a bulb, and he used to say, "You silly boy, a bulb you stick in the ground and hope it grows. It's a lamp." It was really like Dad's Army type. But yeah, seriously. Sorry, Colin. I've taken your thunder there. You carry on.
No. I mean, as you say, I mean, this is though one of the ongoing problems, isn't it? Though, of our hobby, talking about constantly this RF pollution that just seems to keep on coming out from people in the mainstream, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in industry, they're changing over to a lot of LEDs because normally the fluorescent type really aren't reliable enough in certain circumstances. Yeah, there is a big move to change over to LED lighting. Where the problem is, and my understanding of the problem, is that it's the inverters that are causing the problem, and they're not quite built to spec. That's my understanding. Has anyone got any other ideas on what could be causing this? And is my assumptions correct on this?
I think there might be a case. Edmund, was you part of the conversation we had with the Cam Hams regarding their build of their mobile station, where they were talking about the LED lighting they used? Was you part of that conversation, or was that something that I had with someone else, where they were talking about as well? It wasn't the actual lighting itself; it was the power supplies that was actually the problem.
I wasn't part of that conversation, but I was standing within earshot when you had it, Colin. And yes, that is what it boiled down to. And I seem to remember that with certain lamps, I won't say bulbs, there was an article published a few years ago in possibly Radcom, but I can't remember which magazine, that explained to you how to modify one of these lamps into a very QRP 80-meter CW transmitter, I think.
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's very likely that's the part of the device where the interference would be coming from.
And when you were operating on Flossie, though, I mean, there was obviously no interference from the lamps that were around by you at that stage. So they were obviously well grounded and well, up to spec, sort of thing.
Well, that was the point that the cam-hams made, wasn't it? That LED lights or any type of lights aren't the problem in and of themselves. It's cheap, nasty, dirty, unfiltered ones that are the problem.
Yeah. Now, Matt, I know you're a man who travels across Europe a lot. If I remember right, and this is a European Union thing at the moment, isn't it? The fact is, where we're moving all our light bulbs to LED and these long life mercury sort of lights as well across the board. So, I mean, is this something you're seeing actually across the board throughout your travel throughout Europe, where sometimes you're experiencing interference as you travel across?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, this compact fluorescent discharge bulbs, CFD bulbs, or LED alternatives for the historical tungsten lamps and so forth. I'm mixing my lamps and bulbs. I'm hedging my bets here. I spent a lot of time in Spain with my family there, and it's a bit of a mix. We put up some internal patio lighting, and they were all flat panel LED. Bright yellow sections. There were about 1 or 2 centimeters squared flat yellow things, which were full of LED diodes. And so it's a lot cheaper. It's the longevity of these products. A bulb doesn't last for 1,000 hours. It lasts for 100,000 hours. It's enormous. The coloring can be controlled. You can control it live. You don't have to have the tungsten orange glow anymore. You could have pink and blue and whatever you want. So there's a whole factor of reasons, practical, fashionable, that will push this further and further forward. They're more efficient. They just don't emit so much heat, right? All the energy is going out as light. That's not going to reverse given the ever increasing demand for electrical energy that's being seen globally. But you're right. The problem is not the light emitting surface or the event itself, which is creating the illumination. It's this power supply, and it's just the old story, right? There are building codes, there are EMC regulations that are in place. They're either not being read and matched at the manufacturing level, or they're simply not enforced when the problem is recognized. Once this thing is installed and put up on the street or put up in a house, it's creating RFI or whatever it is. There's no course of action. There's no recourse to go back to the manufacturer and say, take these back and suitably filter them. So it's just another example of the same story about an ever more electrically dependent, civilization that we find ourselves in, that's just pumping out noise and garbage beyond the design envelope of what it should do.
Exactly. And Bill, obviously, it's across the band, isn't it? It's a different applications that these lamps are affecting, isn't it? Right.
Oh yeah, I was reading the article and it was talking about different services that they've noticed interference from these LED lamps, which I agree with everyone. It probably is the power supply in them. It's but services such as DAB. Does anyone actually listen to that?
Yeah.
It's not in my part of Ireland, so don't really have it here.
Anyway, all the other services that you can imagine, marine radio, airband, 2 meters, HF, baby monitors, FM stereo, probably 6 meters. These things are pretty bad. Now, what I did is I bought a big pack of a name brand LED bulbs because I got tired of these compact fluorescent bulbs that they wouldn't even make it 2 years. I started writing dates on them because I felt like these things were dying a lot sooner than I would expect. And sure enough, they last about 2 years when I'm using them at the house. And so anyway, I bought a big pack of 2 different brightness values. They're not really watts anymore of power. They're just
they changed the rating to, I think it was luminums.
Yeah,
luminums, something like that. But the watts rating is no longer used.
Right, and so when I got them home, the first thing I did was I screwed one into a lamp right next to the HF rig, turned it on, and started checking the bands. Shut the light off, went back through all the bands. So the ones that I got from a name brand, I don't want to, plug a brand, but a very popular American name brand, those did not cause interference in my testing. But I could see very easily where places that, they bulk order these lamps from a supplier, and that they're branded with whatever name that comes in on them, and they're fresh off the boat, and they might have a sticker on them, but they might not have been tested as well as other ones. So you got to be careful when you buy them. Check them out first.
The bulbs that you were talking about there, are those the CFD type?
No, LEDs.
LED type. Interesting.
Yeah, I checked them out real well because I was very nervous about them, and I checked out the compact fluorescent ones that I have previously. They're actually, at this point in the game, I think just about all the compact fluorescent bulbs in the house have gone since I replaced all the bulbs. I moved in a house and half the bulbs were gone, and the other half were died within the first 6 months I lived there. So I went through and did all compact fluorescent lights, and now I'm going through and doing all LEDs as they fail. Because one thing that, I think it was Matt mentioned, the light that these LED lights produces, the ones I bought, they produce a very nice white light, unlike the compact fluorescents, which everything seems yellow to me. So that's the other nice thing about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, you gotta test them, and they do have a link there about reporting interference. Once again, I don't know who checks this stuff later, but if gotta keep on top of this stuff.
No, that's certainly so. So move on to our next news story now, and I find this one a bit disingenuous actually. FCC chief tells Apple to switch on its FM radio chip in the iPhone. So let's start with you, Bill. Go back to you, Bill, as obviously Apple, an American company. I don't see how this can happen.
Yeah, I don't know how it can happen either. I know I looked it up. My wife's iPhone does not even have the FM radio chip in it. Mine has the FM radio chip in it, but it's not connected to anything. So if because what happens is the engineers pull a spec down, and the chips that they were using have a whole bunch of capabilities in them, and they just turned off some stuff that they don't need, between battery use, between, connections in and out of the chip. They just didn't use some of that stuff. Other manufacturers, hooked up antennas, and therefore it's theoretically possible. But with at least the most recent generations of iPhones, it's not possible. So I'm not exactly sure what they're asking.
Yeah, and if I'm right, and I don't know if you know this, Matt, but if I remember rightly, isn't there not an emergency communication text messaging system they can fire out to phones using the old 2G network on the old Edge network, so they can just fire out a quick notification to a lot of these modern smartphones, if I'm right, which would negate the need for them to have FM radio switched on, wouldn't it?
You mean from like an emergency service notification?
That's it. Yeah. So I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there is something in these phones now, isn't it, where the governments can fire out a message across the cell towers to hit loads of phones, no matter what network they're on, I believe.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I've never seen that. I've never had that experience. I have never seen it happen, so I have to reserve judgment. But I would add just here, asking Apple to, clearly Apple has a huge distribution, very successful business model with their phones. A lot of people have them. you could probably put your hand up in a crowd and said someone within, 2 people next to me has an iPhone of some description, right? And to say that please enable the radio so that everyone can listen to the emergency services because it's putting American safety first and it's a good public deed. That's a little bit of a reach, because how many of those iPhone users, and I put my hand up as well, use it for FM radio? When have you ever used your portable phone, whatever generation it was, 2 years, 5 years ago, as an FM radio tool? Certainly not me. I decompartmentalize everything and say that I have a radio for radio, and if I want to be prepared for bad weather or a national emergency or something, I will have that device ready and charged and spare batteries and all sorts of stuff. But as well, I'm absolutely certain Apple knows its demographic very, very well, and knows that what people want from their devices and what people don't use them for, and radio is never up there on the list. Rather than streaming radio from the internet, which is a different way of accessing it, and that's probably the way that they're pushing. Mm-hmm. So
Matthew, that's what I do. I download an app and then stream it down.
Yeah, and let's not just rag Apple here. I mean, this is a high-end smartphone. I don't want to say the word problem or issue, but do you know what I mean? This is a criteria of most modern high-end smartphones, no matter if it's Android or Apple iOS iPhones, is that to save space and to get more battery in and to obviously hit a price point where they don't come with FM chip radios built into them anymore.
You're saying they're also chasing the same market. They're all trying to get a piece of the same demographic, as I said, and probably on no phone maker's list is FM radio requirements.
Not in Western societies, as you say, it's a demographic thing. It's quite interesting. I'm running a Motorola G5 at the moment, which is a very popular, should we say, high-end budget phone. Probably the best way of describing it. Heavily sold throughout India, Pakistan, etc. as a quite a high-end phone, and their FM radio is still king, and you get an FM app on the phone. I've had mine 7 months. I can't ever remember actually switching it on. I do stream radio, but because I'm trying to stream stuff from other countries. So streaming becomes more important, but local FM radio, you're right. It's something I listen to in the car, I listen to it in the office, but I don't ever set the phone up to listen to it. Edmund, what about yourself? Would that be the same with yourself in terms of your usage? It might be on the phone, but it's not really relevant anymore.
Well, my first mobile phone, I got it before the very first ever Apple iPhone came out. And on the first day I got it, I plugged in the headphone lead, turned on the FM radio function to see if it would work and how well it would work. And that was the one and only time I ever did it. And I've never even attempted to listen to FM radio on a mobile phone ever since then. Based on that experience and based on my experiences in the 90s when I was at university, when I had a Walkman, remember those?
Yeah.
With a built-in FM radio, if you are using the headphone lead as an antenna, then unless you are in an area where there is very strong signals from your local FM transmitter, it's probably going to be virtually unusable as a radio anyway, because as I remember my experiences in the 90s, unless I was pretty much within visual distance of the transmitter mast, then the phone wouldn't be able to demodulate the signal properly. But even if, hypothetically, everybody in 2017 had a mobile phone that contained an FM tuner that could receive a rock-solid 100% signal all the time, everywhere, how many people realistically are going to use their mobile phone to listen to a life-saving broadcast on FM radio?
True. And not only that as well.
I wouldn't mind betting, actually, that even if we were in that ideal situation, that a lot of people, once they realised that they couldn't get service via 3G or 4G, would just switch off their phone and automatically assume that the FM radio wouldn't work anyway.
Exactly. They're going to meltdown. And the other thing as well is most phones now don't have a 3.5mm jack anyway, so you can't dangle out the air or you cable off it anyway. And then the other front, just a factor as well, is if you're in that level of a disaster as well, how likely are you to have your headphones with you? Well, to me, this seems to be a very, very non-starter. It sounds like the FCC are just, I don't know, maybe trying to capture back some of its market, or trying to enforce itself on smartphone manufacturers by saying if we can get an FM radio into an Apple iPhone, we can start regulating it, or we can start doing some stuff along those lines. I think this one's a non-starter for the FCC. I think there's better ways of communicating with people than trying to get FM radio into iPhones and other smartphones, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and headphone leads make rotten antennas anyway, because the wavelength for the VHF FM broadcast band is roughly 3 meters. So unless you've got a 75 centimeter long headphone wire, which would be quite long, that would be a quarter wave, it's not going to do a particularly good job of picking up the signals anyway.
True. Well, let's carry on our discussion about those disasters and what's going on now. We've got a batch of news stories we're going to work through now as the hurricane season is thankfully starting to come to its end in the States. We start here with a really interesting news story here in New York of a student here in a school in New York getting messages into Puerto Rico. So, Leslie, this is another great example now. We were saying about youngsters not being in the hobby, and youngsters, we can't attract them in. And here we go. We've got a school student, being there with his radio, helping stricken people in Puerto Rico.
Good on him. Absolutely. Thumbs up. That's what amateur radio is about, and good luck to him. I think he's a top man.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so he's taking messages known as radio. Oh, you can tell this is mainstream media, can't you? He's taking messages known as radiograms, and he's transcribing them onto parchment, and he's sending them down to Puerto Rico using the magic box. Oh, come on, guys, please. I mean, don't treat people like idiots when you write this stuff, please, to the general public. But great news there. So this was around the time of Hurricane Maria, the resident stuck on the island, and saying getting messages down that way. So I mean, it is a fantastic opportunity, isn't it? And really going from there. And that's not the only place where, as say, we've also got there. I mean, Bill, you're gonna have to help with the geography here. In Newburgh, a gentleman called Sean Flynn, Kilo Delta 2 Bravo Victor Echo. He's been also helping out as well with communications throughout this period of time as well, hasn't he? Throughout the hurricane season.
Sean, 17-year-old, helping out. Love to hear these kind of stories. And I'm not exactly sure where they are.
I think Orange County? Is that?
Yeah. I didn't get that from the article, but it's okay. I still like the article just from the simple fact that, here you got a younger guy doing great stuff, helping out when he can. And both articles are good. I mean, the garden school with the school students doing the communications for Puerto Rico, with Sean helping out. That's great. I just noticed on the ARRL yesterday, they said that the Red Cross asked them, the Force of 50, to stick around a little bit longer, which that's good news. And things are slowly getting better, because I saw Saturn is stopping their Delta 2 operations. I'm not exactly sure how they classify what different stages they're at, but they're stopping their 22 consecutive day net, which 22 days of net traffic. I mean, that's impressive. And they also have a nice thing here with the graphic on their newsletter talking about we've had 15 named storms in the Atlantic hurricane season so far, with just a few more weeks left to go. And that's pretty much what was predicted. So
and Bill,
all this stuff is good stuff. The good news that we're hearing about recovery.
And Bill, they've also increased the symbol rate as well, haven't they? They've given a temporary waiver as well, the FCC, there, haven't they?
Well, they've asked for a temporary waiver. This is good and bad news. There's been ARRL's requested a change from 300 baud symbol rate restriction on HF to by bandwidth.
Is this next to the terms and regulations where they say we've still got to have a wave meter, or have they done away with that? Or I said that tongue in cheek there.
No, it's very interesting because the only reason we have restrictions by bit rate was because the FCC threw a fit back in the 1970s when the ARRL or the FCC wanted to regulate by bandwidth because it was easier, and the FCC and the ARRL said, "Oh no." Well, now it's flipped the way around, and the ARRL petitioned the FCC to go from symbol rate to by bandwidth back in I think it was 2013. It's still hanging out there. But in case people don't understand the backstory on this, the main reason that they want this waiver right now is so that they can start using PACTOR 3 and 4 in the States. Other places around the world can use PACTOR 3 and 4. And this is a good and bad thing. PACTOR 4 definitely can get messages through better. I mean, it uses 2.4 kilohertz of bandwidth, and I mean it sends I think it's 10.5 kbps compressed and like 5.5 kbps uncompressed. It's pretty amazing for what it can do. But it's their boxes, they're sold by a German company. Really, really neat stuff, but we're not allowed to use them here because PACTOR 3 and 4 would go over 300 baud. So that's why they want to change the rules. And like I said, this is good and bad news. It's good because this is a tool that the emergency responders in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands could send files such as spreadsheets and pictures and that kind of requests across HF at a rate that's reasonable, as opposed to some of the other things. It takes a long time to send an Excel spreadsheet over a different mode. Like we were messing around with some stuff years ago with FLDigi and sending files and stuff. It takes a while, and this would efficiently get stuff across. But at the same time, as a ready contester, I'm dreading the PACTOR 3 and more PACTOR 3 and 4 stations just blasting away on 20 meters during a contest. So I'm kind of, I see both sides on this one, and I really don't want to pick one or the other, but it's definitely a interesting request.
Yeah, no, true. Edmund, it certainly does. It's certainly sobering, isn't it, when you see the stuff that's going on in the States and how much work is going there. It's I suppose it makes us sort of think more about the effort of people like Raynet in the UK and what they're doing, and maybe even sort of checking out more about what they do and what we can do to help those guys out, doesn't it?
It does. I'm not going to say anything in response to Bill because the closest I've come to digital modes is 200 milliwatts of Whisper. I haven't done any other HF digital modes at all, so PACTOR is something I've yet to discover and the joys of it. But regarding Raynet and the work they do, yes, I would certainly encourage anybody who perhaps is, shall we say, skeptical of Raynet or thinks to themselves, why do they bother, to reconsider, because without going over old ground that I've done in podcasts before, until you're actually in a situation where something happens and you see what Raynet does, or what people like this gentleman mentioned in the news story do at first hand, I don't think you really fully appreciate or understand the value of it. My particular example was I was at the Shoreham Air Show crash in 2015, and Raynet, who I'm not a member of, who I have no affiliation to, who prior to that day I could have taken it or left it, quite happily, one way or the other. I saw what they did and the value that brought with communications, and it totally changed the way that I looked at that kind of thing. So absolutely, Colin. Yeah.
No, exactly.
Edmund, can I put it another way? Nobody, I'm not laughing or joking about this. Nobody wants radio amateurs in a situation. Nobody. But as these stories go, and of the Shoreham example that you talked about, Edmund, that there are radio amateurs out there that step up to the plate, and that should be commended.
I think, just to echo on that, Matt, it is that thing where we spoke about as well in the episode about, how amateur radio is no longer traditional, it's no longer this, no longer be. The one thing that never seems to be removed over the nearly 10 years I've been involved in the hobby, in one form or another, is that just general good-spiritedness of getting involved, helping fellow man, etc. And, all these stories really echo it, don't they, Matt?
Yeah, and that's... Is that because we're lucky that we just all have this sort of altruistic thread between us that it just comes with interest in electronics or radio, and we're also really nice guys or girls? I think not. I think it's because we recognize that our hobby actually isn't just a self-contained hobby. It actually can impact dramatically the welfare and the safety of others. And you pick up a radio and you can have a great time talking point to point with someone across town or across the world, and that's great, and you got their log and their call sign and so forth. But when stuff hits the fan, you want to bring that skill together just as a human being to help out, and we have a knowledge and a technology and an ability to actually really make an impact. So I think it's a natural thing for the vast majority of humans to want to help out in circumstances of, extreme circumstances. And the fact that we have a radio and that knowledge means we can make a more immediate impact and help, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, true. I think that's a great one there to finish up the roundup of the news stories there. So Leslie, let's touch base everyone about what they've been up to over the last few weeks since they were last on the show. Leslie, I know you're in recuperation mode, but hopefully it's giving you the opportunity as well to maybe get a few things done as well that might interest people.
Well, what I've been doing is just pottering about with little bits of projects. That where you put projects in the cupboard and they're about 10 years. Well, I've been doing all of those little bits and pieces. Nothing special, just pottering about really. Trying to recover from what's happening. But I will be fully up and I'll be doing my usual bits and pieces shortly.
Fantastic. Well, you'll have to give us an update next time you're on the show there in a few weeks' time. Bill, I know last time we spoke, it was you were off to do wedding anniversary stuff, if I remember rightly. And the question is, did you sneak a radio in your bag and enjoy a bit of radio while you were away as well?
No.
Good boy.
Had a great 10th wedding vacation, anniversary vacation. We were in C6A. That's the Bahamas, for those that aren't sure what that prefix is. And I did not even apply for a license. I did not take a radio, which is fine because I got searched by the TSA 3 times. That would have been fun to explain. But we had a very good vacation, really good time, neat island, neat country, and I definitely want to go back at some point. Radio-wise, things really, I ended up taking out about 10 days. So I really didn't get as much radio stuff done as I wanted to, but I do want to share that I did work Herm KB1 RJC and Merle KB1 RJD when they achieved their Mountain Goat soda activation the other weekend. I believe it was October 2nd-ish, something like that. Right around there, I actually got to work them on 40 meters, which is very exciting. I don't know if anybody else enjoys chasing the soda, but I do enjoy chasing and activating the soda. And then the last thing, by the time this podcast comes out, I will be in the middle of screaming CQ, probably on 40 and 75 meters, for the Pennsylvania QSO party. This is our annual statewide / we actually get some international people wanting us to come down to 20 meters to work us. But basically, it's work all the counties in Pennsylvania. Well, I'm in a very small county with very small amount of amateurs and even less who are active on HF. So I end up, getting on 40 meters calling, CQ the QSO party from, Montour County, and all of a sudden I'm rare DX. So that's always very exciting.
Oh, I don't know. Well, you good fun. And would that be all weekend, will it? Or will it be operating on the Sunday? Or where will you be operating?
It's a bunch of hours on Saturday and a bunch of hours on Sunday. They have forced breaks in there, and it's been like that for as long as I can remember. So it's like noon local time to, I think, 1 a.m. and then like 9 a.m. on Sunday to 6 at night local time. So it's once again, it's a neat little contest and a lot of band activity. So it's kind of fun that way.
Exactly. So anybody who picks up the show early on Sunday morning when it's released might be able to work here. So keep an eye out there for Bill and his team there. Just talking about travel, a travel tip here for you guys. Something that I found out the other day while traveling, not only out through Dublin Airport, but back for Hamfest. If you have a handheld, and in my case a Wooson, a Canon DSLR camera, a voice recorder, and relevant charging cables all packed together in the same part of your hand luggage, you are going to get stopped.
Oh, yes. I've been asked this before. I've been asked this before. The regulations on batteries on aircraft has changed quite considerably.
Not for that reason, believe it or not. So the reason why you get stopped is because they can't see through them. And there's too much high quality plastic stroke the materials inside the DSLR camera that they can't see through the bodywork. And because they don't know what it is, it's a guaranteed stop. So all they just see is a great big black mess in your bag. And that's a straight stop. And you're gonna have your bag searched. So that might be a bit of advice. So even though European airports are saying, we just want your laptops and your tablets out of your case, on my next trip next week, I'll be taking the DSLR camera out of the bag as well and putting that separate and see if that fixes the problem. So just something that was picked up this last week. But as I say, you couldn't even see through the Wooson bodywork when the guy actually showed me on the screen, and all you could see on the Wooson was just this big black square on the screen sort of thing, and that was it. So just a bit of information there. Matt, you're
something new every day.
True. You're a traveller, Matt. Hopefully that's helped you out. You're nodding your head there, going, "Yeah, I knew that already." What are you trying to travel like that for? But what have you been up to in the last few weeks?
Not a lot of radio, that's for sure. So, as listeners may or may not remember or care, my family lives out in Spain. We've had to move the house. So last week, finishing on Sunday, I was there packing boxes, shipping bookcases, emptying the place we were. We put all the stuff in storage, waiting for the next place that we're going to move into before that gets ready. And so basically building bridges with my mother-in-law and just trying to keep the peace. But I am looking forward to a little bit of, let's say, electronics and radio time here in the next week or so in the Matt Cave, as I call my desk. I've just ordered actually a new book, Learning the Art of Electronics, which is a sort of a spin-off student book from the very famous Art of Electronics book. That has been around in electronics literature for a number of years.
I actually have that book right here in front of me, The Art of Electronics.
I have the first edition, it's a phenomenal book. It's quite heavy going if you're a newbie like me. So I've taken a hard look at the reviews and this sort of associated student manual, which is Learning the Art of Electronics, which is just give you the names by Thomas Hayes and Paul Horowitz, is sort of a self-contained learning electronics of the same ilk as that Art of Electronics book. So I've got that coming in the post. I'm quite excited about it, and I hope to put it to good use for building bits and pieces for radio. But on the 21st of October, so I guess 10 days from this recording, I'll be at a CW boot camp up in Essex, trying to hang out with some like-minded, I hope, novices, as well as some more experienced people, to learn more about CW and get some proper tuition, because I've basically been doing this at home for a while and not really progressed anywhere like I'd like to. So I've got that coming up.
Exactly. Well, all the best with that, and hopefully it's
sounds good fun.
Sounds good fun there. So Edmund, it was your first trip to Hamfest. As I say, I think you enjoyed yourself. And as I say, is there anything else you've been up to since Hamfest?
No.
No.
that's a short answer.
That killed it. But as always with Hamfest, one thing that gets me is how wonderfully kind our listeners are who come up and thank us for the show and shake our hands, and just generally it's very positive about what we do, and obviously how well we're received by the people we interview at Hamfest. Guys, if you haven't been, it certainly is worth a visit. Even if you just do one day, it's certainly worth a visit to the show there. As I say, it's quite easily located. Newark's quite a nice part of the world. As I say, it's certainly worthwhile doing. And I think we go back next year, wouldn't we, Edmund?
I'd certainly like to go back next year. If you were viewing it purely as Hamfest and nothing else, and maybe you had a shopping list of things, and the plan is turn up, go round as quickly as you can, buy the stuff you want, and then leave as soon as possible. If you were approaching it with that way of looking at it, then one day would be more than enough, I think. If, however, you are also looking at it as a social occasion, or primarily as a social occasion in my case, then there is more than enough things to see there and people to talk to fill up the 2 days without any trouble at all. And it was nice to meet some of the listeners. I won't try and name them all because I'm sure I will accidentally leave some people out, but I spoke to somebody I worked on 2 meters earlier in the year when I was driving up the M1. Met who else? Carl Gorse, 2 Echo Zero Hotel Papa India, who's now upgraded his Yaesu to an FT857, so he can run a little bit more power when he's out and about, so that was nice. Pete Sipple of Essex Ham fame, M0PSX, good to catch up with him, and the TX Factor guys were there filming as well. And Lauren, oh yes, how could I forget Lauren? Mike 6 Hotel Lima Romeo, I think her call sign is from memory. She did so well with her achievements in the portable activations and SOTA and that kind of thing. Real credit to the hobby that young lady is, as are her parents. And her mum and dad are both licensed amateurs as well. I knew her dad.
Smile on that.
I knew her dad was, but I hadn't realised prior to the Hamfest that her mum is as well, I think. Apologies if I've got that wrong. So I looked at a few videos on YouTube in the week before going up to Hamfest, and it's very hard to tell just by looking at the videos exactly how big the hall is. It's quite hard to get the right perspective, and it's slightly bigger than I thought it was going to be. The biggest Hamfest I've been to previously was the Kempton Rally. I would say that the Newark Hall is comparable in size to Kempton, possibly slightly bigger, and there were more interest groups rather than just out-and-out traders at Newark than there are at Kempton. So I was very pleased to meet the UK 6 metre group, the British Amateur TV Club, and the Lincolnshire Repeater Group. Spent a lot of time with them. That was a good selection of people. And last but not least, Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. It is there in the venue at Newark. If you look up their website, it tells you that public Wi-Fi is available. If you look at the advertising signs dotted around the place, it tells you it's available. What it doesn't tell you is whether it's free or whether you have to pay for it or not. As it turns out, you have to pay for it. And when I tried to connect on my rather ancient Apple iPhone, complete with its FM radio built in, it did tell me the price, and I can't remember what the price was offhand, but I do remember looking at it and thinking, oh, that's not remarkably cheap, shall we say. Yeah. So if you're going to Newark in 2018 and you want to have internet access while you were there, I would suggest sorting out an alternative way of doing it rather than perhaps relying on the public Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And my only other tip as well is the fact is I'm not very impressed by the on-site catering. So bring a sandwich. That'd be my last bit of advice.
I will be there next year. That's a promise.
Oh, but there we go. See, this is problem, Leslie. This is the problem. See, people made suggestions they were going to be working satellites. People are being held at now. Now you've just made the suggestion you will be at Hamfest next year. So fantastic. As soon as we get the hotels moving, I'll give you a shout and let you know where we're staying. Right, okay. Well, that's episode 250's round table done there, guys. All I can do is to thank you not only for today but for all your previous shows you've been on. So thank you very much to Bill, November 3, Juliet, India, X-Ray, Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie, India, Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike, November, Golf, and Matthew, Mike 0, November, Juliet, X-Ray. Guys, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for all your efforts over the previous shows. Thanks a lot, and as I say, 73s.
It's been
7-3.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. I'm with the Cam Hams here at the National Hamfest, and one of the most impressive sights is to see the Cam Hams portable shack, is how I'm going to describe it. The guys refer to her as Flossie, but she's a portable shack. And I have Lawrence with me.
Hi, Mike 0 Lima Charlie Mike.
And I have Rob with me.
Mike 0 Victor Foxtrot Charlie.
And both Lawrence and Rob were involved in the build of this wonderful unit. So, Lawrence, tell us more about it. How did you come about this particular van, and what makes this so special?
Well, this is Flossie Mark II. We started with Flossie Mark 1, how long, about 7 years ago now? This was a van that we were given, which came with a mast, came with some basic bench work, a little bit of electrics, some basic lighting, and we used that very successfully for quite a few years until the rust caught up, as it does with a lot of commercial vehicles, and we had to unfortunately say goodbye to Flossie 1. So we went shopping for Flossie 2, and because we had already had a van set up as a mobile shack or a portable shack, we knew a little bit about what we wanted to achieve. So we started from a blank canvas of getting a 2012 Ford long wheelbase transit van. She's silver. And from that we started thinking about how to actually build it to make it useful in various radio uses. Now, you might think, why would you want a mobile shack? Well, maybe you've got the problem of not being able to get planning permission to put up aerials at home. Well, if you had a mobile shack with a mast, you could put it up even on your driveway, and no one can really object about that. But maybe you want to actually take your mobile shack somewhere interesting to operate. Maybe a rare web square, maybe a rare locator square, maybe somewhere a bit more exotic like an island off the coast. Somewhere you can get to with a ferry, obviously, if you've got a large van. But, yeah, you can go fun places, maybe national parks, somewhere more interesting than just suburban gardens around England. So, mobile shack. Other things that this one does for us is it allows us to put on a station like the special event station at the National Hamfest here very quickly and easily. Gives us a great amount of space where we can show off the hobby. So lots of interesting uses, and yeah, a bit of an interesting story around the build.
Okay, so that's a real good start. Now I'm going to get Rob to give us how did you go about building it, Rob?
Thanks, Martin. So we started, of course, with the basic van. It was an ex-double glazing van. We figured that meant it had been driven, 50% of its life at least. And we started off by taking everything out. And that was the preparation stage. So we learnt some things from Flossie Mark 1 that Lawrence mentioned. And this time we built in, for example, insulation from the start. That makes it much more comfortable if you're out doing maybe one of the Tuesday evening UK activity contests in the winter. It keeps you a bit warmer inside. That's nice. Insulation first, lining. That's your basic chassis to build from. We wanted to keep it very flexible, as well as doing events like we have here at the Hamfest. She also acts, for example, as a RAINET control vehicle. Very different setup. Field days, different again. We're involved with one of the local community broadcast radio stations, Cambridge 105. So that means that in that capacity, she's a radio outside broadcast studio with a load of audio gear in here. So actually, we went for a very flexible layout. The basic operating bench stays the same. Storage happened in the form of shelves. The first Flossie had cupboards and drawers, and we found that over time those Those got damaged. They were very hard to work with. They fell open during transport. So we stayed away from that and built everything around the little plastic really useful boxes. Makes it much easier to see what you've got, much more legroom because you can get them out of the way. So little things like that we learnt from the first one and we could then bring to the second one and build it up into a space that lets us put 3 stations we've got here this weekend, or a control operation, or a radio studio.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I'm sitting in this van with the boys. It's almost at the end of the National Hamfest. The clouds are coming over, and it's quite warm in here, so I'm quite pleased I'm in the warm. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good job. But the layout is a long bench behind us, which, as you say, is an operating area. Shelves above, but you also have mains hookup and 12 volts and lots of other things in here, don't you, Lawrence?
As I said, a whole group of us got involved in the build. I think it took us about 4 or 5 months, beginning of 2016, every weekend. Group of us putting in quite long weekends and relaxing by going to work after the weekend. So, as Rob said, lots of insulation, lots of build out that, shelving and so on. After we got the shelves and the bench in, yes, electrical work. So we've put in 20 power sockets. You might think that sounds a bit excessive in a van, but if you've got a rig plus a linear plus a rotator plus a laptop, you've already used 4 just for one station. We've catered for putting in 3 stations, so that's 12 used. Someone will come along with a mobile phone and say, where do I plug my mobile phone into charge? You start using sockets very quickly. We thought about network cabling because we're using computer logging, or with the radio station, if we're using it for outside broadcast, we'll have playout systems, we'll have news screens so that we can see what's coming in on the news, we'll have email screens so that we can see when people send messages to the station. All of that requires network and computers. So rather than having a bunch of cables all over the place that are always getting lost or broken or damaged, we put in a proper structured network cabling. So there are network sockets in the van coming back to a patch panel with a switch. So we've done what we call a proper job. We've put in a DC power ring, so there's 12 volt power with power poles and screw down banana plug connectors, so that someone arrives with a rig with a power pole connection, we can plug in, or if just a pair of bare wires or ring terminals, we can connect that up. Battery in the van as well, so big leisure battery hiding in front of the wheel arch on the left hand side. That's connected up to a nice charging system so that when we have shore power hooked up to the van, we're charging with the charging system. Otherwise, there's a split charging unit. So as we're driving, the vehicle's alternator is charging the vehicle's batteries, as well as our leisure battery that's driving rigs and amateur equipment. So quite a lot of flexibility around how we can power things and how we can actually provide power into the van. I said we've got a hookup on the outside, standard caravan style hookup. We can get, like we've got at the Hamfest here, shore hookup from the site. Otherwise, a small generator gets us going.
Yeah. Well, that's all very well, and sounds like the inside's been very well thought out. But one of the most impressive parts of Flossie, isn't it, is above us. How tall's the mast, Rob?
It goes up to 20 metres or 60 foot. It's a Clark mast. We were very fortunate to get this mast with the first Flossie. And whilst the van fell apart into a pile of frost, the mast was still in very good condition. So we actually took that out of the van, patched up the hole so that we could get rid of it on eBay, and that kept the worst of the rain out, and then we moved the mast across. We get a lot of questions from people saying, oh, do you have to reinforce the floor of the van when you put a mast in? Well, not too much. It's sitting on a square of wood, I guess about 1/2 metre square, and the mast only weighs about 80 kilograms. That's really just a person. So if you imagine you standing on a van floor, it's the same pressure as the mast, so actually that's not a problem. We did reinforce the roof, another lesson we learned from the first one, where the mast goes through the roof. If it got a little bit windy, you could just see the roof flexing a little bit. So on this one, we actually bonded a sheet of 3mm aluminium. That kept everything nice and rigid, and means that it's definitely going nowhere. If it gets a bit windy, we can put guys out on the mast, but to be honest, for the small 2 metre beam that we've got up today on a weekend with light wind, it'll just stand freely.
That sounds good. But there's also, looking at the van, there's 2 other things that make it quite unique as well. You've got a nice roof rack on the top and a hatch to go skywards from the van.
That's a skylight, we've got to have poshness in some way, or a sunroof. So yes, the roof rack came with the van. When we bought it as an ex-glazing van, it had a big side rack for carrying sheets of glass and a big roof rack for, I guess, ladders and other bits and pieces. We got them to get rid of the side rack because there's no way we're going to be carrying bits of glass around anymore, but we kept the roof rack, which is great because it's got a walkway. It's a very sturdy roof rack. The challenge, of course, is how do you get onto the roof to work on the mast, to put aerials up there and so on. Now, on our previous van, we had a ladder on the back door. Problem with that is it tends to pull against the bodywork. It's never that sturdy, and if you see a van with a ladder up the back door, you look at the condition of it, they never look great very long. We decided to do away with that idea and put a hatch in the roof that allows us to put a small loft ladder up inside and climb up that ladder through the hatch onto the roof. Means that it's now a lot more secure on the roof. No one can just walk past our van, climb up the ladder and mess around on the top of the van. But it also means it's very easy to stand in the van and work on things in the on the actual top of the mast, pass things up through the hatch to someone working on the roof. So it makes it a lot easier. Challenge with hatches is you want something sturdy that someone can actually stand on if they need to, because you're putting it in the roof, but you want something that's also, more importantly, waterproof. So where do you go? You turn to the boating world. So boating hatches that you'd put into expensive boating equipment generally means it's an expensive bit of equipment, and we're looking at £400 to £500 for decent grade marine hatches. Now they come in various sizes. We picked one that fits the average of us. So yes, you do have to think about who's going to be going through the hatch and will they fit. So we tried various things. We made a few templates and tested a few people, picked this one and installed that, which involved, of course, cutting another hole in the roof, which if anyone's cut a hole in something and thought carefully, yes, you've measured about 5 times and got 3 people to confirm that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's very impressive. Now, Rob, in here, you've got LED lighting. That's been the big problem for a lot of people. I'm surprised to see it.
So it's almost it's never the LEDs themselves that are the problem. It's always the power supplies when you get noise from LED lighting. So in a mains installation, it's the thing that goes from 240 volts mains down to normally around 12 volts or a few volts per LED, and it's always that's the problem. Here they're direct feed 12 volt LED strips. You can get this on eBay or other online retailers for a few pound for a 5 metre strip of it. And here we've just stuck it into the lid of electrical mini trunking and screwed that onto the roof. That keeps it nice and secure, and it means you get a very well distributed light, fairly low power. We think we've probably got about 40 watts of lighting in here. That keeps the van nice and bright. A couple of strips along the roof and one under the shelves just to give some nice light onto the desk without casting glare into the operator's eyes. So no problems with noise whatsoever, and we expected that to be the case.
Yeah, you answered that question well, because there's been a lot of talk about noise and one thing with a lot of these lighting systems, so that's a good one. Now, Lawrence, she's a lovely van, but what about insurance? I mean, if somebody was to build one of these, how would they go about telling their insurance company? Would they have to explain that it was a modified van?
So the big secret is, first of all, start with a broker. Don't try any of the online comparison sites because they're all probably going to get a bit confused, especially if you're thinking about using it as a group. So we have, as a group, a lot of users of this van, and you don't really want to have to maintain a named drivers list with your insurance company, especially since they've all cottoned on to the idea of, you're making a change, that'll be £40, please. So you want to get a policy that covers you for a group use. So our policy we have covers drivers who are over 25 and have clean licenses as long as they've got permission of the group. Now, you said, what about if it's modified? So we started with the questions, and we said, they'll say, have you modified the vehicle in any way? And we said, well, yes, but what are you worried about? And they said, well, have you modified the engine? And we said, nope. Have you modified the exhaust? Nope. Have you changed anything on the suspension? Nope. And they said, well, what have you modified? Well, we said, we've put a 60-foot mast in the roof. It sticks out about a foot out of the top of the roof, and our bridge clearance is now 13 feet. And they said, no, that's fine. You haven't modified the van as far as the insurance company is concerned. So it is what you change on the vehicle that is constituting the modifying, and it's normally around performance and how it drives.
Yeah. So being honest up front solves a lot of problems. But now I suggest she's about 3.5 ton vehicle so everybody can drive it, yeah?
Exactly that, and that was one of the things we definitely looked for when we were selecting the vehicle. Most of us in the CamHams have driving licenses issued after that change to the maximum weight, and she's plated so that she's under the 3.5 ton limit, but also we've still got capacity to add a 750 kilogram trailer on the tow bar. We have a small trailer mast, and still keep the maximum train weight, the combined maximum weight of both components, under 4.25 tons, which again means that someone on a newer driving license can drive the pair of them without having to take the additional trailer license.
Yeah, so that's all good news. So in many ways, you've really thought this one out well. And for anybody else who's thinking of doing a similar exercise, what sort of money would it cost them, Lawrence?
So, obviously, you can go shopping for a van. We bought a 4-year-old ex-commercial van with around, what do we have, about 80,000 miles on the clock, and that costs us just about £8,500. Obviously, you shop around and you look at the quality of the van, the quality of the engine, and the mechanical side of it. You're going to do things like we did, of stripping out the inside, looking for all the rust, treating the rust, sealing up all the holes, making sure that the van is going to last you as long as you can, doing things like wax oiling the underside, and everything you can to protect against stuff that kills vans, which is generally rust and condition. After that, you start thinking about what you're going to spend money on. Now, if you don't have, like we were fortunate, a Clark mast. Now, the Clark mast we've got, to replace that, you're talking nearly £10,000, so it's not a cheap mast. You can go across to our friends at Total Mast Solutions, and you can spend half that on a very comparable mast. You can buy a smaller mast. Maybe you don't need something such this sort of height, or you can look at the online retailers and the likes of eBay or the military auction houses, and you can look for the Scam 12 masts. Those are pretty solid masts, and with a bit of servicing, they're certainly going to have plenty of life left in them. You can get all the service kits to make them work as far as holding air and going up nicely. And one of our friends, Jeff, just across the grass from us, has done that with his van. He's put a Scam 12 in that by cutting a hole in the roof, taking the Scam's box off and mounting the Scam 12 in there. Now, those masts you can pick up anywhere between £300 and £500, so you're suddenly talking about very affordable mast options there. Obviously, you've got some wood and carpentry that you're going to be doing, so you need some people with possibly power tools and so on. So all the friends who've got decent workshops and the right tools to cut wood, building it out. You're going to do some painting because you want to make it look a bit nice. You're going to do some insulating. We spend a bit of money on insulation. You're going to do things like put some carpeting down. Find someone who's done an office refit and see if you can scrounge all of their old carpeting, or even if they've got offcuts, and use that to carpet your van. So lots of options around how to keep the costs down. We probably spent in total, if we had to buy the mast, if we went across to Total and we bought a mast, we'd probably spend £14,000 to build another Flossie from scratch with nothing to start from.
Yeah, so it's not mega expensive, and you know, it's one of those things, when you consider you could buy a rig from the big manufacturers for getting on for £9,000 anyway, and that's just the radio. So having a full shack with a massive mast doesn't, in that comparison, is not mega expensive. But
well, if you went off shopping for a tower, what does a large tower cost you that you're going to put in your back garden?
Too true. So you told me earlier that Flossie gets used for more than just yourselves. Is that an advantage?
It is, and it makes it a lot easier to justify. We're out here with CamHam's clothes on today doing a special event station, but we also take part in various contests. She gets used by Cambridgeshire Raynet, typically either as a control station or as a talk-through repeater station. The mast obviously comes into its own there. Other days we're out with Cambridge 105 Radio, which is the broadcast station. So she might look like an outside broadcast studio, providing live sound at an event, that sort of thing. And the more organisations you can get together, the more people that are using it, the easier it is to justify that ongoing financial commitment, because of course you do have the insurance, the road fund licence, the MOTs, any work that needs doing on an ongoing basis. The more people that you can get involved in this, the more ways that you can split that cost, and actually it ends up being pretty cheap to run.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing is, if it's being used and not sitting in a field,
what's the point?
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. So a fantastic vehicle, in fairness, and you guys have done a really good job. You two and the rest of the boys. We ought to mention the rest of the boys, but
there was a team involved in, and if you lift up one of the carpet tiles in the back corner, there's all the call signs of people who were involved in the build, and I think it's about 15 people overall. So this was a massive team effort. You get people that can do different things. You get Jeff, who was experienced in van conversion. You get Colin, who's experienced with metalwork. A few of us can do carpentry. Someone else can design the electronics. It's a team effort, and you just draw on everyone's skills and come together as a project.
Which is brilliant.
Now, if you go to our Twitter account, G3PYE on Twitter, and you scroll back to January 2016, you can actually follow the timeline of the build. You'll see when we bought the van, you'll see how we started stripping it out, you'll see an animated a pictorial diary of our build, and I'm sure Martin maybe will put some pictures on the blog. But if you want to see Flossie in person, she's out and about at places like the RSGB convention in a few weeks' time, and various other special event stations around certainly the southeast throughout the year.
Certainly is. And I'm sure if you look for G3PYE or G6PYE on the air, there's going to be a fair chance, not guaranteed, but a fair chance you'll be working Flossie. Is that correct?
It certainly is. Normally with a portable on the end of the call sign. Sometimes also with an S in there as well, GS3PYE, when we're up in Scotland.
Yeah. So all of your, that's good. Listen, guys, I've taken much of your time. It's coming to the end of the show and everybody's packing up. So listen, thank you very, very much for your time. Thanks.
Cheers, Martin.
Thanks, Martin, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence and Rob.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
So I'm with Carl G7AFT from Yaesu. Carl, great to talk to you. Thanks for seeing us. So the latest thing from Yaesu then, we're obviously familiar with the DR-1X repeater. What's new with the DR-2? What can we expect from this box?
Okay, so the DR-2 is quite different from the DR-1. It has two receivers, so one can be used for the normal users, and another receiver and transmitter can be used for control purposes or for emergency transmit channel.
Okay, so is that from the point of view people can get in and do you send like tones to it, or is there software you run on the remote radio and then access it remotely?
Okay, so there's a system where you can basically pair one of our new handsets, our new handhelds, or a firmware updated existing radio, and it can be paired with the repeater. So that's really for the repeater keeper to control his repeater.
Okay, so you send commands via the hand. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So what other features can this radio do? I mean, there was a rumour about it not supporting Wires X. I think that's been squashed. The new repeater will support Wires X if they want it to.
Yes, you can use Wires X with the DR2, but you wouldn't really want to use it for that. You would probably still continue to use the DR1.
Right.
The main difference with the DR2 is you really use it when you want a private network of repeaters. Perhaps you want to have a number of repeaters over perhaps an area of the land which is sort of quite hilly or something like that. So what you can do is you can install a network card into the DR2 repeater called the LAN 01A, and it's a small microcontroller. It's got a small version of Linux running on there. Mm-hmm. It's got a little Ethernet card in there as well. You can set a TCP/IP address onto it, and then you basically do that for each of the repeaters in your network. You then set up a normal TCP/IP routed network that covers the large area that you want to cover.
So it doesn't need to use the internet at all. It could be a private network, a microwave link between the sites.
Microwave link, perhaps a lease line or some other form of TCP/IP network. So no internet is required. If you want, you could use the internet with a VPN or something, but it's not required.
Okay, so for example here you've got this running literally two repeaters side by side, pretty much running on a private LAN, and they work just as happily, so people don't need to expend money on the expensive internet connections at sites if they don't want it or if they don't need it.
Exactly. And of course you may find, like in this demonstration example, we have a 2-meter repeater and a 70-centimeter repeater, and they may even be in the same rack, where you may want to then link the two repeaters, and you can do that with this new system.
Okay, and so how do we link the repeaters together? How do we know where you want to send the traffic to? I mean, before we might with the DR1 and the Wires X, we may have just connected to a particular room or a reflector, whatever, and we'd have gone out on the internet. How do we tell the new system how that works?
Right, okay, so there's a new function, we like to call this System Fusion 2, but basically there's a new function which is available as standard on the FT70, and it's available as a firmware upgrade for the FT1, FT2, FT100 and 400, and basically it lets you set what's called a digital group ID.
Right.
And it's this that allows you to decide which repeater you're accessing and which repeater you're coming out from.
And these are IDs, are they numeric, or am I literally programming, like, for example, in London ours would be GB3XP. Would we have to program GB3XP into the radio, or we have a numeric code?
No, so you have a numeric code. So when the repeater group set up their network of repeaters, they will assign a digital group ID to each repeater. You can kind of liken it to a CT/CSS tone on analog.
Okay.
So the repeater group keeper might set, say, one repeater to number 1, another repeater to number 2, another repeater to number 3. And so if you're communicating with that local repeater, you would then set your digital group ID to the same ID as the repeater.
Okay. Now, some of the repeaters, obviously, at the moment, some of the Fusion networks are quite big. Some of the rooms are particularly huge. I know the Americas Link one often has several hundred people on it. The CQ UK, 50 or 60 odd people on it. Is there a limit with the DR2 and the amount of rooms you can have, or is this sort of infinite?
Okay, so basically the digital group ID can be set from number 1 to number 99.
Right.
So it basically limits the amount of repeaters on a single network to 100 repeaters, but bearing in mind that is on a single private network. Of course, you can have many private networks across the world.
Yeah.
So, of course, in reality, you're limited to, there is no limit as such.
And in theory, people are joining those networks with other networks, and is that something that you're seeing happening? Would you have, say, for example, one network of 100 repeaters being able to connect to another network of 100 repeaters, or is that beyond the realms of possibility?
At the moment, it's not. It's basically set between 1 and 99, because that's what you do on your handset.
Yeah.
You set the appropriate number that the repeater keeper has told you to use to access your repeater.
And from the point of view of accessing it, I'm presuming all the firmware updates are, of course, free on the website, are
Yes.
they?
Yes, they are.
And programming it, I mean, do we need special software, or is it literally you can program it from the radio quite simply on the front panel?
Okay, so on all of the radios, you basically hold a single button down, and then basically you just turn the dial and you set the DG ID to whatever you want. The digital group IDs are not stored in memory, because the idea is you're meant to be able to change them quickly and easily as you need to select the different repeater groups.
So simplifying the use then for the user. That's fantastic then. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Is there anything else you can tell us about this radio in the short term while we know it?
Yeah, so another thing I'd like to say is how you basically, now we've got a network of DR2s, is how the user will actually then determine which repeaters he's coming out of.
Okay.
So the way he does it is the repeater group will then basically set up a little group which they will assign a number, let's say number 10. They will then assign the repeaters in that group, let's say repeater number 1, number 2, number 3. When the user then sets his digital group ID to number 10, he will come out of repeater 1, repeater 2, and number 3.
Okay.
And also they have the ability to set more than one group. So if he sets another group of, say, number 40, which is repeater number 1 and number 2, and the user sets his ID to number 40, he will come out of repeater 1 and repeater 2.
Okay, so in theory you could come out of one other repeater on a network of 100 repeaters, or 10 of them, or 100 of them, if that was what you desired to do. And from the point of view of programming this into the repeater, is this done on the front panel of the repeater? We're running a server, like we do similarly with the WiresX software. Are we running a server for this as well?
Okay, so one of the main differences between the DR1 and the DR2 is that there is no extra PC required.
Right.
So, as I said earlier, there's a LAN 01A network card, which also includes a small Linux computer on it. You set it up initially with an IP address. Once that's set up, all of your digital groups are set up on the front panel of the repeater.
Okay, so in theory, because it's got a LAN card in it, if you were doing this, say, for example, on a public internet, we had our repeater, a site on the top of a hill somewhere that wasn't as easily accessible. Our repeater, for example, is on the top of a hospital. The repeater keeper, as well as via his radio, could he get into it remotely if it was it had the right routing through his firewall?
At the moment, with the revision of the software at the moment, you have to control it either from a remote radio or from the front panel.
Right, okay. Yeah. But that's something that maybe might come in the future, we don't know. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate your time. And if people want to find out more about this repeater, just go to the Yaesu website, which is yaesu.com.
Yaesu.com or yaesu.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that.
At Newark, the National Hamfest, I'm with Dave Wilson. I've spoken to Dave many times before. Dave's the project manager now for the online learning examinations that the RSGB are talking to us about, which we spoke in Freakshaven, but now you're the man in charge, Dave.
Well, I wouldn't say in charge, trying to pull it all together. Yeah. Bringing it now to the masses, should we say. We've done the pilot phase, we're now into the live phase, and we're looking to sort of encourage more and more people to take the exam online. The advantages for advanced licensees is they get immediate feedback, I think which probably Ian mentioned earlier on. And we're looking at the same time to take it down, to take it across to all three levels in short space of time.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, it's now the more modern way and everybody's used to using tablets and computers. People want instant results, and this is a way of doing it and bringing our hobby into the 21st century and driving things forward. So I think it's a great thing. Where are the exams going to be delivered? Are they going to be delivered by clubs, or are they going to be delivered at national events, or how are they coming?
They'll still be delivered, using the club infrastructure. We've got hundreds of exam centres around the country with registered exam centres. We've got invigilators registered, and the online exams will be done in exactly the same way. So clubs will still be heavily involved. You'll still do it using 2 invigilators, a minimum of 2 invigilators per exam. If you've got more candidates, then you might need more invigilators. But all we're doing is really taking the paper away and putting a computer in front of the candidate. And the candidates that have taken the exams since we've been doing this since early March, every one of them has been impressed in the way it works, happy to see it. Even those that have been unsuccessful have been very pleased in the way it works, because they've had instant feedback that sadly they weren't successful, but they got that instant feedback. Rather than having to wait 10 days for bad news, they got it right away. So.
Yeah, 10 days. I remember when you probably, like me, we had to wait best part of 6 weeks,
That's
didn't we?
Right, from the old City and Guilds, yeah. If you use an external exam centre and they went on holiday and got lost in the post, yes, it took ages, yeah. And then to wait for your licence similarly,
Yeah. I went through that as well, David. It was an interesting time.
Frustrating. It was the worst. It was actually worse than doing the exam, I thought, waiting. But no. I mean, this is the thing with the world these days. Everybody wants instant gratification, and this is trying to going towards that. I mean, we've got ideas to go forward with this to automate the processes. At the moment, exam secretaries are sending a lot of paperwork in, some via email and some still via snail mail, to Carol to process, to put the exams into place. We're looking to automate a lot of that on the back of the online exams and linking it to the shop and things like that.
Okay.
For exams.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm ignorant on this, but if we wanted to do an online exam for, say, some students, do we still book it in the same way, or do we?
You still book it in the same way currently, right? Yeah. You would send in an application pack to Carol, but now the forms have actually got a box to tick to say online, on advanced online, and so you just identify which exam you want to take. Carol will then put the system into process. We've still got the same notice that we've been working on for the time being, and that's going to be changing shortly, reducing it from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, but the process is still exactly the same. What happens after you've registered the exam with Carol, she then enters the exam on the TestReach system. That then generates emails to the candidates to say, you've been registered with TestReach. Here's a link to the application. You need to go to the website and download it and try the test tutorial, which is gives the people clues on how the system works. That's the first email they get. A few days later, they'll get another email to say they've been registered on a particular exam centre, particular date, particular time, and you need to be there. By the way, have you done the tutorial? Have you downloaded the app onto your computer? It doesn't have to be the club's computer, it can be your own computer. And then a couple of days before the exam, you get a reminder to say, don't forget, you need to be at the club such and such a time to take it. So the idea is to give candidates the opportunity to become familiar with the system itself, and that's what we've been doing here, showing them how the thing works. The system has got a built-in tutorial to show how to maneuver through the screens. So, and then you do the exam in the usual way. The only difference is that the invigilators, they don't have to do any online marking. It's all done by the computer. When it comes to security, you can't say, well, I'll change the time on my computer and run the exam early, because you need a PIN code from the invigilators to access the exam itself. And lots of little. You can't use the mouse and try and go off the screen and go to Google and find the answer to question 3 or anything like that. You're locked down. So there's lots of security measures in place. The system will. The clock runs, you answer your questions, you'll get a warning, half an hour to go, 5 minutes to go, and if you ignore those, then it'll auto-submit it after 2 hours at advanced level, and then within seconds you get your result, which is, one of the big benefits.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, you mentioned that they could use their own computer.
Mm-hmm.
Is this Windows only? Is it Mac, Windows, and Linux?
Mac, Windows, no Linux. Yeah, at the moment. Yeah, I mean, the spec, people have said, well, what about that, the computer? It's not a high-spec machine. Anything from Windows 7 onwards will work. You just need 4 gig of RAM. Most computers, which are, 3-4 years old, these days will run it happily. Mac similar, the operating system or whatever. So yeah, and you say, the club can provide the computer, or the candidate can provide the computer. The app goes on the machine. When the exam's finished, the app closes down and it leaves nothing on there that any other program doesn't leave. It's not as if there's any sort of malware or anything else in there. It's all clean, so it's safe. The Test Reach are a big company. They do it for a lot of prestigious customers, so they've obviously been through this with due diligence, and they're happy that this system is safe and clean and things like that.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, that was always one of our big concerns, is how it was going to work, because early on when it was originally announced, we didn't have a lot of things you just told us, and we know that there was a lot of cheating in the past going on. Let's be fair about it. There's stories of people buying their licenses many years ago, not recently, and having been a trainer, and the RSGB do check up and make sure that things are done correctly, because I was checker. That's
right, that's one of my other roles, being quality manager. I send out inspectors to inspect exams as they're going on in the live, there have been instances. A lot of clubs are doing a good job, I have to be honest. A lot of clubs are doing an excellent job. There are some who are sort of making small errors, forgetting to put the clock up, for instance, forgetting to put the time up or the notice on the door. Though these things happen, they're in minor indiscretions, But yes, there are clubs out there who have been doing things that they shouldn't be doing, But I think this is one way of combating that. The measures that we've got in, the security measures we've got in here, will eradicate a lot of that. So there's not a possibility of doing this at home using your own computer and the invigilator giving you the PIN code, right? Because that won't be allowed, because there's measures in place to stop things like that happening.
So that's good. That's good. So it sounds like you thought a lot of this through. How long are you going to be involved with this? Is it just get it up and running and then you move on to something else?
Well, I doubt it. I think it's like a lot of these things. You end up with it for a while. Well, we've obviously got quite a bit of work to do. I mean, at the moment we're just doing advanced. Very shortly we'll be announcing going down to offering intermediate online, and then shortly after that we'll be announcing foundation online. We've done that for the main reason being the numbers involved and the learning curve associated with what we've got here. Advanced is, there's about 40 candidates a month, So we can handle that. If we'd gone down the foundation route from day one, we're looking at 150 candidates a month. So the learning curve is a lot steeper. The risk of failure is a lot higher. But we're happy now that what we've been doing on here, all the exams that we've run, there's only one that hasn't run, and that was because the invigilator didn't read the instructions and didn't get his PIN code. So the candidate unfortunately had to resort to our backup measure, which was that we used to send paper copies of the exams just in case everything fell around her knees. That guy had to go using that exam, but that's the only one out of all those that have taken the advance. Every candidate that we've spoken to has enjoyed it. They're pleased to see it working. They think it's a much better system than the online. The risk of transposing the data across from the question paper to the optical marking sheet has gone. Yeah. The computer does it. You've got the risk of forgetting to answer a question has gone because the computer will tell you. If you've got a question that you're not sure of, you've got the opportunity to look at it and change the wrong answer to the right answer, which is quite often we find that people change the right answer to the wrong answer, that sort of thing. I'll be around for quite a while, because there's lots of enhancements that we do into this, automating the system. The idea being to link it to the shop and link it to automatic registration for exams and candidates. So these are all things in the pipeline. So.
Yeah, sounds good. So one really last question, and I think you've already answered this. What happens if you have somebody that's got a computer phobia and doesn't want to do it on the computer, which is the Luddite of the thing? Yeah,
we can still, the system will generate paper exams. We've tested that. In fact, at the pilot phase, we had at the proof of concept phase, we had one club who put an application in for a foundation exam, and what we did, rather than putting it through the EMAS route, the current route, we put it through the test reach system, and they printed off a paper which then went out to the club to run the exam. They'd no idea that it hadn't come off the existing system, that it'd come off test reach. It went out, candidates took the paper, filled it all in, did all the next thing. It all came back. Carol treated it as if it was a normal exam, and it all went through swimmingly. So there's no hiccups. We can offer paper, but obviously we prefer not to. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, having done all this work. And as you say, there's so many safeguards and improvements for the candidate. The candidate really it would be stupid not to go this route.
A lot of people here today. I've done 8 sample exams here. Everybody who's had a go has said, could have come along with stories. Well, I've just passed my intermediate. The guy who was sitting here a few minutes ago. I've just passed my intermediate. I'm going to go for the advanced. I want to do it this way. I want to do it with you and this and that sort of thing. And everybody is of the opinion that this is the only way to go.
Yeah, that's good news.
And Test Reach being this is their bread and butter business. They're an excellent company. They're working with us, developing our systems. I mean, a lot of what we do is different to what other organisations do, but Test Reach recognise that and are happy to work with us and develop the system as we're going along.
Well, that's good news, David. Listen, I've taken a lot of your time. Thank you very, very much for a chat, and let me wish you every success.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
All the best. Cheers.
Cheers, Dave.
Great stuff.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, that just about wraps up our 250th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. I really hope you've enjoyed the features there. Both the Martins are interviewing the RSGB in relation to a new online examination. The gentleman Carl from Yaesu, interviewed there by Martin Rothwell, and also our interview with the Cambridge Hams regarding building their mobile station Flossie. I'd also like to thank Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Bill November 3 Julia India X-Ray, and Matthew Mike 0 November Julia X-Ray for taking part in the News Roundtable. Thank you very much for your time. And as I say, that's a greatly appreciated and great laugh to do. Donors this episode as well. Grant Porter, Kilo Golf 4 Sierra Delta Romeo. Robert, Papa Delta 0 Romeo Mike X-Ray. And also Nick, Golf Zero Hotel Foxtrot Lima, the couple of anonymous donors, and the monthly and annual subscription donors. Thank you very much for keeping us advert free and helping us out for trying to buy some new microphones. As always, we'd like to consider us at icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send away is always greatly appreciated. If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for our newsletter on the ICQ Podcast website, where we'll send you relevant news stories over the next fortnight between shows. Just to let you know, heads up, guys, we will potentially be having a special release next weekend from an event we're going to during the week. So look out for that in your podcast readers and catches, etc. But say if you're signed up for the newsletter, we'll definitely know when that comes available for you. So as I say, certainly check that out from there. You'll start seeing YouTube videos now available very shortly of some of the interviews that we took at New York Hamfest. There's a couple up already, which won't be appearing in the audio shows. But say if you want to see the actual interviews that we've been say in this show and in the following show, they'll certainly be up on YouTube very soon. You can actually see us interviewing people for the show, as I say, which might be of interest for you as well. So that just about wraps up everything we've been doing now. Martin will be back next episode in the chair for the round table, back from his trip to his holiday in Cyprus. I hope with some good tales of what's going on with the amateur radio community in Cyprus, so we look forward to hearing those. And as I say, in the meantime, if you've got anything else you'd like to share with us, drop us a line at info@icqpodcast.com. We'll do it all again in the fortnight's time, guys. Look after yourself. Bye-bye. 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 Bye-bye.